Karen Honey, Masood, Sanjay Lopez, our Executive Director, Julie Crosby. Special thanks to Becca Staley, John Randolph, Paul Powell. I'm Amy Goodman.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarland. I'm glad to be here. Today is Tuesday, March 21st, 2023, and we continue here at KFAI with our Spring Pledge Drive. And before we begin today, I want to invite my colleague and partner in the studio to come on and say a word or two about what our goals are. Miguel, how you doing, my friend?
Hey, we're doing all right. How are you doing now?
I'm doing well. I hear we're about a few dollars short of our pledge goal of $30,000 right now.
Well, actually, we're right at the $30,000 mark, and our goal is $40,000 that we hope to get through the end of this Thursday evening. So really, I feel like we've made like 20 grand in 1 week, which is fantastic.
Awesome.
I'm very proud of our listeners, all of our volunteers, all of our listener members that still continue to give to KFAI for well more than 45. We've been around for about 45 years now. And
yeah.
And that's what it takes to sustain such a community media platform such as KFAI. I'm sure you know a lot about that as well.
Well, I'm so lucky to both own a newspaper and have a multimedia company, but to be connected with an asset like KFAI. I mean, I love the fact that this show comes on right after Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! She's got a worldwide presence, and we pick up the energy for the important things that she's talking about, she's calling attention to. We hope to build on that and create a space that's local, that elevates and shows how we all have the capacity to engage, to act, and to write futures that are different, new narratives. And I think the station does that. So if you're listening right now or online, join us, support us. What's the number to call? How can you do it, Miguel?
Yes, you can call 612-375-9030. We got phone operators in Studio 5. So if you want to talk to a KFAI staff member, you want to let them know how much you love KFAI, yes, call the number 612-375-9030 or give online at kfai.org.
Well, Miguel, I'll bring you back in between guests today to keep this message fresh. Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting this, and we're glad to be part of this enterprise of community building at KFAI. I want to tell my listeners too, and the viewers who are watching across the several platforms, we really, really value your support. We hope that what we're doing is of value to you. And I'm also asking you to support the conversation by going to YouTube, the Insight News YouTube channel. Find The Conversation with Al McFarland, like our program, share, and also be a subscriber. We want to build our subscriber base. We've just crossed 300, which is great. We want to get 1,000 people subscribing to The Conversation with Al McFarland, to the Insight News YouTube channel. Well, got a great program today, 3 great guests, and we're going to be talking to my friend and colleague, John Wilgers, who's president and CEO of Greater Twin Cities United Way. We'll be talking to a cultural historian who is a specialist on or doing work in Brazil and culture. And we'll also be talking with Dr. Debra Warner, a forensic psychologist specializing in male trauma. We'll see what all that means. Before we begin, I have a hot topic today, which is an appropriate one that leads into my conversation with John Wilgers. On the Insight News website, there's a page a story that we published on March 16th that headlines, GOP state senator said he's never met a hungry person in Minnesota. And he said that while his colleagues, state senators, were passing a bill to ensure free lunch for all students in Minnesota. The article says that a Minnesota Republican said he opposed the bill to guarantee meals for all students because he had, quote, yet to meet a person in Minnesota who is hungry, close quote. That's State Senator Steve Drazkowski. He made those comments when he argued against House File 5, a proposal to dedicate roughly $400 million of taxpayer money to feeding the state's children. He was elected to the Senate last year, and he pushed to use the money instead to boost proficiency in levels in reading and math. He said hunger is a relative term. Boy, he said, I had a cereal bar for breakfast. I guess I'm hungry now. That's kind of, dismissive, arrogant, flippant, and from my point of view, inappropriate. Well, that leads me to today's discussion with my friend and colleague, John Wilgers. John Wilgers is the leader, CEO, and president of Greater Twin Cities United Way. And in the spirit of disclosure, I want to say that I have served, I think, 2 terms, maybe 3, on the board of the Greater Twin Cities United Way. And I'm serving now ex officio as the vice chair of the board. And I'm happy to be a member and a part of this great organization that connects people around health, around creating wealth, around employment, and more, around being decent and a great community here in Minnesota. John, I wanted you to talk about the new initiative called, it's a food drive that tries to create culturally relevant foods for communities around the state of Minnesota. And you're trying to create, volunteers and donations to support food shelves in Minnesota that serve the Afghan, the East African, the Karen community, the Latinx, Indigenous, and Southeast Asian communities. And the idea is to look at where culture intersects with food and hunger and preventing hunger. John, welcome to the conversation. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, Al. Thank you for having me today. I don't think the experience of our community is consistent with the experience of the senator you just quoted. I was looking at some information recently that showed that Minnesotans made 5.5 million visits to food shelves in 2022, and that's a 50% increase over 2021. And so that's a significant increase in the number of visits. And I think it's a reflection of a lot of things. I think it's a reflection of, the high food prices. It's a reflection of inflation in general, high prices for everything. And then also some of the supports that were available to many families in our community coming out of COVID aren't available any longer. And so food security has become a bigger issue in 2022, maybe than it's ever been in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota.
Well, John, I love the name Flavors of Our Community. Explain what that means and why it's an important recognition of the diversity of culture in our community.
Right. So Flavors of Our Community is really a nod to the fact that our community is made up of lots of different people, lots of different cultures, lots of different ethnicities, and what's good and comfortable and relevant food for one group, for me, for anybody, isn't the same for everybody else. And so what we found in conversations with our nonprofit partners and in conversations with community is when folks go to a food shelf, lots of times the food that's available to them there does not allow them to eat in ways that are culturally relevant, ways they're used to eating. And so out of that came Flavors of Our Community, which is a food drive, like you said, Al, which is a food drive to provide the kind of food in these food shelves that, when combined with other things, allow them to make meals that are more used to what they're used to having and the kind of food they like to eat.
How does the program work? I understand that this project specifically runs through April 7th. What's going to be happening between now and April 7th?
Yeah. So the project actually works in 2 ways. So our goal this year is to prepare or collect 6,000 culturally relevant food packs. And like you said, they are designed to accommodate the eating habits or the cultural habits of 6 different groups of folks. And we accumulate them in 2 ways. One, there are a number of companies that host volunteer events, employee engagement events, where they buy, pack, and then deliver to us these food packets. So, you know, our largest one happens at Post Consumer Brands, but there are 3 or 4 other companies that are doing that. And then there's also a volunteer at home option for people where you can go onto our website, and our website will have a list of the packets and what goes in the packets, and you print that off and you go to the store and you shop for it and put it into a sealable bag and then drop it at one of our drop sites. And our drop sites are really at a number, and they're on our website, at a number of Bremer Bank locations across the Twin Cities. So between those 2 initiatives, we had hoped to get 6,000 packets.
So we're Greater Twin Cities United Way, but this project really expands both statewide and regionally. Is that correct?
Right. First time this year. So this is our 3rd year of the program, and we've expanded it this year in a number of ways. Number 1, more packets. Number 2, we accommodated a couple of additional cultures this year in the packets. And then we partnered with 14 other United Ways in outstate Minnesota to bring flavors of the community to their communities. And then, like I said, our sponsor, Post Consumer Brands, is doing it in 7 or 8 locations across the United States. So it's in a number of other states. The project is going well. I talked to the folks who do it for us, and we haven't even started to accumulate the volunteer at home packets, and we're already at 10,000 packets. So we're already well over our goal, and we haven't even started to get the volunteer at home ones yet. So we're making good progress.
That's wonderful. I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation with Al McFarland. My guest is John Wilgers. He's the president and CEO of Greater Twin Cities United Way. And we're talking about this initiative to help people become more food secure. And it's called Flavors of Our Community. You've got, John, partners here in Twin Cities that you work with. Let's give them a little what's the right word for it? Sunshine, elevate them, promote them, because they do great work in creating the connection on the ground.
Well, that's right. You know, in everything we do, Al, we want to make sure that we are informed by the communities that we're serving. And one of the ways we're able to do that is through these relationships we have with nonprofit partners. And so we went to a number of them, and I can read a few off if you're interested in hearing some of them out.
I think we have around 10 or so. We give them all. Let's mention them. You know.
So the nonprofits that number 1 helped us determine the needs and what ought to be in the packets based upon their relationships in community, and also who will assist us in distributing the food packets are 360 Communities, CAPI USA, Clues, Division of Indian Work, Issaroon Works, the Karen Organization of Minnesota, the Muslim American Society of Minnesota, and North Point Health and Wellness Center. So those are the nonprofit partners that have helped us with this.
Well, John, let me close this segment of the interview and my visit with you by having you once again invite our listeners and our viewers to support this work. You know, before I do that, I think we should always take a minute to just give a survey of the breadth of United Way initiatives. So much great work being done across several streams of engagement. Why don't you give us a quick look of the priorities, the elevator speech of United Way activities right now?
You know, I'm working on my elevator speech because it tends to go too long, and I know we don't have that much time, but we really work in community in lots of different ways. I'll start by talking, because it's really relevant right now, and you talked about it in your hot topics. We have a policy and advocacy agenda. We're really busy with that right now because the legislature's in session, where we work to drive policy and funding that goes to support the communities and the initiatives we're engaged in. We partner, like I said, with nonprofit partners, both in providing grants and operating grants, but also they provide such a great connection for us to the community that allows our work to be informed by the people who we are serving. We have close relationships with our corporate partners where we engage with them in helping both address some of the needs of the community, but also helping them achieve their philanthropic and employee engagement goals. And then we have a number. Oh, I should mention 211. People may or may not be familiar with 211, but that's a call center that we operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and makes referrals to anybody who calls in. We get around 300,000 or 400,000 calls a year for people who need referrals for help. And so those are some of the things we do. Still not exhaustive, but we're a complex organization working on complex problems.
John, thank you so much, my friend. It's good to have you on. You're always welcome here. We have collaborated in that the organization generally tries to connect some of the community stakeholders to this program so that we can do interviews, sort of documenting and celebrating, elevating important and critical work in community that stakeholders are creating and I think delivering effective engagement around in our community. So thank you so much.
Al, thanks for having us and for supporting our work. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation with Al McFarland. Before we bring our next guest on, I want to have the station jump back in. Miguel, this is why this conversation, this program, the station are so critical, so important. And this is why we ask once or twice a year people in the community to show their support by becoming members, by making a contribution, a donation to KFAI. And what a wonderful conversation that was. And I tell you, the ones that are coming, equally important, critical, useful. What do you think?
Hey, there you are. Running around here waiting for my cue, and then I heard it and I ran in the studio for it. That's a slice of life when it comes to community radio, is making things work, making things accommodating our volunteer hosts. We have nearly 80 to 100 volunteer radio hosts here at the station, all very committed. And it's one of the best joys about being a staff person here is just getting them involved, enabling them. And then, of course, having the listeners like you really enjoy and absorb this content, whether if it's through the love of KFAI or through the commitment of getting the right information out to community. I mean, that's why people stay involved here for well over 45 years. So it's
so what can our listeners right now do? What do we need people who are listening or watching or checking us out online? What can they do right now to support this work?
If you want to do something right now, you can always give us a call at 612-375-9030, or you can give online at kfai.org. Once you're a member in our system, we have all sorts of premiums that we can offer here. Sometimes they're show specific, but other times they're just cool t-shirts with our brand out there. And so you're out there being how you say it, real. It's like you're living underwriting for the state. And that helps us grow. That helps us build community. It helps build awareness. And so once again, you can call 612-375-9030, or you can give online at kfai.org. We appreciate the conversation with Al McFarland, and back to you, Al.
Great. Thank you. Well, listen, let's move on. I've got another exciting guest, a new friend. I'm just meeting her through the program today, and it's Dr. Debra Warner. She's a leading forensic psychologist. She's a popular speaker. She's also a trauma expert. She trains professionals in that area. She's highly sought out as an expert for television programs and talk shows and podcasts. She does instructional seminars and conventions. She's been quoted in Fortune magazine and the book Peace in the Hood, relative to mental health and trauma. I mentioned earlier that one of her areas of specialty is male trauma. Dr. Warner, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation. Let's start right there. What is male trauma? Break it down for me.
Male trauma. Well, trauma is very specific to males.
No, I'm not hearing your voice very strong. I don't know. Go ahead now.
Can you hear me now?
I do.
Okay, perfect. So, I mean, male trauma is not the same as what happens to men. Men usually have different types of issues that happen when they've been traumatized.
You know what? I really am not hearing you very strong. I don't know if you can put your microphone closer to you or have a stronger voice in some way, but and maybe Miguel, you can tell me how it's
Can
going
you hear me
across
now?
the air.
Is that
Let's
better?
try it again.
Is that better?
It's soft, it's faint, but I don't know how to adjust
So
it. But
odd.
go ahead. I
Now
think
you can.
we'll hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes, better.
Okay, so male trauma is very different because women, tend to act as when they've been traumatized versus men, right? So men, when they're traumatized, usually turn that inward, and they also do not disclose for many, many, many years when they've been traumatized. So men have a different set of issues that go with that.
I'm still not hearing you really strong. I don't know if you can lean into your microphone better or not, if there's any way to be close to the microphone, but I'm not getting the strong
Is
voice
that
that I
any
need.
better?
That is better. So you just
That's
stay right
better?
there, I guess. Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will stay right there.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay. So you want me to re-answer the question? So
Yeah, sure.
male trauma
let's
is very, very different. So women, when they've been traumatized, behave in a certain way, and men behave in a different way, right? And many times, men, when they've been traumatized, they do not disclose for many, many years because they're afraid society won't listen to them. And in my work, I work exclusively with men and men who have been traumatized, and it's not just sexual trauma, but physical trauma, emotional trauma. And you mentioned my book, Peace in the Hood. That is about violence and trauma. And so when people, men live in violent societies, a lot of times that comes out as it comes out trauma, but people always want to think, oh, there's a different, it's sexual trauma or it's physical abuse, but just living in an environment is traumatizing.
And so, what does male trauma and the culture, how do they um, impact each other? I mean, my picture of growing up, the boy thing was to be, play the Westerner, the cowboy, the soldier, the training, the becoming a man meant something at one level or another. It had to do with violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
It had to do with an expectation that violence was a solution and something that I should not be afraid of. Does that play into how males operate in community and culture?
Community and culture intersect, right? And how we perceive them. I mean, men, are told they have to do all these different things in society. They have to be a top athlete, they have to do these things. But we look at culture of people of color, right? They take on other things in the world. And in doing that, a lot of times, men believe that that's just the way their life's going to be and they never ask for help. And one of the things we have to do in our society and in our American culture and being a person of color is that we have to look at all those layers and make sure that we're looking for individuals.
You're doing some television work now. Tell me about what you're doing in the area of television and forensics in particular.
It's interesting because I just did something on CBS called To Find the Truth, and I did forensic psychology. And one of the things that I did was that I get to talk about crimes and crimes that have happened. I can't say exactly what I did, but it was a lot of fun. And this afternoon, I'm going out with Michelle Williams to talk about mental health and just talk about how mental health affects us all and affects us as society, but what we can do to help our society not have so many mental health issues and bring awareness.
So I'm sitting in Minneapolis right now, and Minneapolis has unfortunately uh, achieved a world fame around the televised murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
How does that trauma play out in the lives of Black people, first of all, in the lives of everybody else? And what is the global impact? I mean, people are getting killed and they're dying both in accidents and in acts of violence all the time. Violence is with us all the time, everywhere. But there's something different and something, I'm not sure the right word for it, but, kind of gut wrenching when we really focus on the pattern and practice of systemic violence against Black bodies. And also, when we look at the violence that we visit on each other, not only within the Black community, but as human beings, anywhere around the world. How do we navigate? And is there a pathway to a different understanding of reduced trauma or no trauma in our lives, healed lives that both resist and avoid trauma? What do you think?
You have so many points for me to answer in that.
It's a loaded question.
It's a
Sure.
loaded question. And, when I looked at George Floyd, when I saw George Floyd, one of the things that I saw was that people were in disbelief that this even happened. We have to start with believing that this is occurring. We have to start with believing this is occurring every day. And then we have to make people accountable that it's occurring. It's not just that George Floyd happened. People don't get it. It's those microaggressions every day that we allow, that we don't do anything about, that we don't step up and say, hey, dude, that was not cool. Okay? Because those microaggressions lead to the bigger aggressions and where we have George Floyd's. So the first thing we have to do is say, yes, it occurs. Racism's not dead. And it's not just racism. It's the prejudice. It's the thought that you have that leads to the behavior that's racism, that leads to the oppression of keeping down. We have to recognize that that occurs in our society and be able to say, I have prejudices, just like everybody else. But how am I going to act and show future generations not to do that? That's when we can stop saying we have George Floyd. Until then, those things are going to keep happening, just in a different way.
Dr. Warner, what's your personal story? How did you come to this work? How did you choose this field of study? And what motivates you? What brings you to the passion that you invest in this work, in this calling?
God is the first thing. He opens every door for me. But the reason I do this is to have what I just said, having those conversations, to be able to say that, right? There's something about, you asked me about male trauma earlier. And one of the things I wanted to say was that I'm a woman talking about male trauma. Why is that? Because it's easier to hear from me. So if I have to be that voice, if I have to be that person, I will. But when I do my conference every year, the SCRIPT conference, which is on male trauma and survivors, one of the things that made me almost weep is that all my guys, my boys, Barbara, my boys, they're ex-gang members, they're not community interventionists, they stood up and they gave me a standing ovation. They said, we do this because we are you. We are a reflection of you. And I said, what do you mean by that? Like, it just hit me. And they're like, you are able to say these things because you're a woman, but yet you make sure that we're all heard. And if that is my role in this world, when I go into prisons and I do that, and when I go and write my books or whatever, then that is what I'm going to do, because then that's my neck of the woods. I think this is my neck of the woods. And I have a little boy who wrote his own book about how he sees the world, right? So I'm that example of that, and my daughter did one on cookbooks. That was her perspective. But you know what I'm doing? I'm sowing seeds. So that's my passion, is to sow the seeds for the next generation.
Dr. Debra Warner, thank you so much for being here. I want you to come back.
I will come back without audio.
Because this whole thing of trauma is so critical now for us to develop the tools, the language, right? The ability, the vocabulary that allows us to unpack the impact on our lives and to be healed, to move towards healing. So listen, thank you so much. And I know you've got another meeting to get to. Thank you. We'll talk to you later on.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation with Al McFarland, and we thank you for being here. Let me bring in my colleague at the station again. One more appeal to you, dear listener, dear viewer, to support us, support this conversation here at KFAI. Miguel, my friend, I get amped when I have interviews like this one. They lift me up and they intrigue me because people bring such power and such conviction, such fierceness to their work and their vision. I thank them for doing that. And I'm thankful to the station for giving us the place to share these conversations, these voices with the public around the country, around the world.
No, I mean, you grow your audience by bringing these conversations to the airwaves. They don't have to happen in a room where you have to pay a conference fee to access. This is all free and accessible to the community via the radio or via the internet. And so, and that's what keeps these kind of media platforms going as well, is through listener and folks who are engaged, is through their support. So give us a call, 612-375-9030 or kfai.org. I like that you mentioned in the last break about following Democracy Now! And how they're speaking about, global issues, and we're making that connection down to the local level. And you do that so well, Al. And we're very grateful to have you here at KFAI.
Well, I'm grateful to be here. And, speaking of that, that's kind of what we're going to be doing right now, because for the balance of the program, I'm bringing my colleague in who is joining us from Bahia in South America, right? And that's what's cool about this technology and the opportunity that we're dealing with. We can connect our people globally. And so Mestre Yogi Sena is the managing editor of the Insight News section that we're calling Afro-Descendientes. And the concept was that we would create a conversation or stories, a section in the newspaper that reveals, reflects, elevates the variety of ways and sounds through which our people show up in the world. We, the descendants of Africa. And so Yogi and I originate and work with a brother named Jesus Chuchu Garcia. He's a diplomat, a scholar, author, just a Renaissance man and revolutionary, based out of Venezuela. But he joins us and writes for us from Colombia, from Venezuela, from Spain, and different places throughout South America. Yogi joins me in translating his work from Spanish to English, Spanish to Portuguese, and then we also have colleagues in Africa who translate the stories into French, into Yoruba, into Swahili, and we present this content uniquely with the intent of showing ourselves that we own all of these idioms, that these idioms belong to us, that they are expressions, ways in which we express our truth, our reality, and they give us the sense of nuance that we can look at the world, we can assemble the world differently from the narrative that comes from imperial language and imperial concepts. So Brother Yogi is here, and he has connected me to our next guest who's joining the two of us, Dr. Kenneth Dossar. Dr. Dossar is joining us today from Philadelphia. He is a cultural historian. He produces arts projects, arts consulting, educator, social activist, photojournalist, and more. And I think Yogi and Dr. Ken met in Bahia, and now we're meeting on the air. Brother Yogi and Dr. Ken, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And, so let's talk about this connection. First of all, Dr. Ken Dossar, talk about your work as a cultural historian and why it's important for us to have conversations like this, a space like this, in which we share, compare, and we envision by also acknowledging the history, and often history that has not been properly preserved or documented or shared, history that's hidden sometimes with intention.
My intention is to really have our communities, the African American community in the US and the Afro-Brazilian community, interact more than we've been doing. There are so many similarities in our history and culture that we don't know about. And if we know about this, just like you were saying, how you have connections in Venezuela and you have connections in Trinidad, that our communities expand their horizons and begin to see how connected we are to one another. And within that connection, there's tremendous amount of strength and support.
Yogi, how did you and Dr. Dossar meet in Brazil? How did you guys make the connection? And Yogi, first of all, welcome. As always, so good to see you. And I absolutely enjoy the relationship that we've had and that we're building on now, I think, innovating in communication.
Yes, yes. Thank you for having me again. Yes, you're coming through strong now. So I know about Dr. Dossar from many years, like in the background, since he's responsible to the establishment of capoeira in the Washington D.C. area by bringing Mestre Moraes and Cobrinha. So, I knew about him. But what was surprising is I was walking downtown in the historical district here in Salvador, and I saw him coming, but then I hear her calling my name. Because I saw him coming, I really don't know this person, but and then it was him, and I was like, wow, somebody had recognized me. And then he said that he had associated my image, or somehow we were aware of each other without having met personally. And that day too, we had a magical encounter with Regina. I remember that a person that passed through and get so emotional to seeing us and identify his strength, his ancestral strength on the street, those kind of magical things that does. And then invited us to go for an opening of art exhibition of Projeto Axé. So, and then we have opportunity to, in the same day, having lunch, and then is when we start to, strategizing how we could collaborate. And to me, I'm very interested in anthropology as a student of, and to me it was delightful to meet Dr. Dossar, you know.
So, Dr.
So
Dossar, talk about your life work as an educator and how the question of African culture, Africanity comes in. I have been reading a lot and learning a lot. The language that I'm coming across is a language I get from watching and listening to, you might know him, Dr. Greg Carr, who's out of Philadelphia, who does programs every day on a project called Narrative in Nubia. And he always talks about an Africana way of knowing. And the thought resonates with me personally and deeply. So I'm wondering how your work is described, how you describe it. Is that the direction that you see our people, our culture moving in, and to what end?
Dr. Carr and I went through the same training at Temple University, the African American Studies PhD program. So our insights, outsights are quite similar.
Do you know Mario Beatty as well?
Yes.
Okay, because I was just in his class a few minutes ago. His class on hieroglyphic language, Middle Egyptian. So yeah.
So growing up in Philly is a jazz town, and so you grow up learning about jazz, you're learning about art, about culture, all right. And then at a certain point in time, you hear about this Yoruba festival called Odunde, right? Which is a Yoruba festival in the heart of Philadelphia, celebrating Yoruba New Year's. Well, this just opens up your imagination to what can be. And so, as Mestre said, Salvador is a magical kind of place, and this idea of magic is constant within African culture. And one of the things that happen as you begin to study the culture and live the culture, you see the magic begin. So my magic began one day. I was working at a TV station in New York, WNEW TV, and I saw a press release that talked about African Brazilian martial art called capoeira. This was 1976. And at that point in time, I didn't know that Black folks had martial arts. Since that time, we found a whole history of Black folks who were warriors, who had martial arts systems. And so from 76 to maybe 83, I began searching for information on capoeira. But that was the door for me. I went through that door of capoeira, and everything else opened up in terms of Bahia's magic. What are their spiritual traditions like? What are their musical traditions like? What is the food like? More importantly, what are the people like?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the magic comes in, the relationships with families. And so my first trip to Brazil in 1983, I couldn't speak maybe but 4 or 5 words of Portuguese, and they were, "Where's the bathroom?" Right? And but I was connected to a cultural historian. Her name is Makoto Valgina. I didn't know how important she was when we met. And when I initially contacted her, she said she didn't want to take on any students because, number one, she thought I was white. But when she found out that I look like I look, she said, "You don't have to stay where you stay, and you can come live with our family."
Wow.
And so I was brought into the family, and for 6 weeks, not speaking Portuguese, I learned how to deal in I wouldn't call it the hood, but it was a couple of steps away from the hood.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to learn and more about capoeira and where it came from. And there's cultures here other than the Yoruba. There's Bantu Congo. There's Jeji Fong cultures as well. And so now the magic starts again. It's even larger. And so what of these things would be interesting to people back in the US? And so, real quick study, we have started in the early 20th century African-American sororities and fraternities, the AKAs, the Kappas, so on and so on and so on. But the oldest sororities, African descendant sororities, began in Bahia in Brazil. Right?
Really?
We go back to the 1500s. There's the Sisterhood of the Good Death, Irmandade da Boa Morte, the first African American female sorority. All right, and they were founded because during that time, Black folks were not buried. They were either, once they died, their bodies were left in the street, thrown into the river. And so these sisters did 2 things. They promised the Virgin Mary that if she would help them become free, they would always celebrate her. So her feast day in the Catholic Church is August 15th. August 15th, there's this big international festival, Irmandade da Boa Morte. The second thing that they did was to provide funeral services for the dead. So that's the term. Good Boa Morte means good death. So you would die, and rather having your body thrown out into the street, these sisters would bury you and help your family. So there's this ancestral connection between, let's say, all of the female sororities, African American female sororities or Greek letter organizations, and the Sisterhood of the Good Death. Okay, so there's other ways of other connections as well. The notion of you're probably the same generation. You remember Smokey Robinson had a song back in the day called "I Got to Dance to Keep from Crying."
Sure, of course.
And so what is taught in Congo philosophy is this: dancing, drumming, and singing are spiritual medicine. All right, that help lift the spirit. So Smokey Robinson was channeling some Congo stuff and didn't even know it. That's my interpretation. Okay, and so there is this notion of an African-centered or Quilombistic perspective on life that is different than the Western perspective. See, Western perspective on life begins with the creation of the planet Earth and 7 days and Adam and Eve, blah, blah, blah. But African folks got a different way of looking at how we got here. And more importantly, our role on the planet. What
Well,
are
take a minute and let's sit in that for a second, and let's talk about the African approach to our existence. How would you describe that, if you could do that briefly, and and go into what you said as the role we perceive that the mission we have on the planet right now?
so that let me I'll move between two systems, the Yoruba and Bantu system, because those are
Sure.
the ones that are in most in Brazil. So this notion of what it means to be a human being is to develop one's character. Ifapele, beautiful character, last forever. All right. So we're trained to work on our character, honoring our elders. You know, one of the things you see in the tejeros, in the sacred spaces in Salvador, is just this tremendous honoring of ancestors and elders and children, right? And so there are songs out now that talk about how the community, these communities that grew up during enslavement, no one was turned away if they were hungry, much like your first guest, right? So folks could knock on this community door and get fed. That happens today. Okay, so the principle, the basic principle I like to center on is this notion of character, demonstrating good character. How can I be better tomorrow than I am today? That's our responsibility. And that ties into what Native peoples, First Nations people talk about, to walk straight, walk in peace, and to love Mother Earth who sustains us. But the United Nations just came out yesterday and said, listen, the stopwatch is ticking. You know, we're on a
Collision course. Yeah.
Self-destruction.
With
And then you
determination.
still have people who deny that you know, the ice caps are melting and that human beings impact weather. You know, one of the things that we hear nowadays in our weather forecast, they talk about how these atmospheric rivers are coming into the West Coast and they're just inundating Los Angeles. You know, a year and a half ago, I heard about, and it was much more poetic term in Brazil, flying rivers. But it didn't have the same kind of destructive force that it seems to have when we report about it here. Okay, so I can't do everything, and this is really a semester-long study.
Sure.
If you ask me a couple more specific questions, I can.
Well, let me do that. Let me bring Yoji back in as well. First of all, I'm Al McFarland. This is the conversation with Al McFarland, my guest, Dr. Kenneth Dossar. He's the founder of an organization called Mandinga LLC. It is a production house. He's an arts consultant, cultural historian, educator, social activist, also a photojournalist. And he's collaborated with arts organizations and educational institutions to create public programs that explore the heritage of people of African descent. His consultations included producing and presenting events for organizations like the National Black Arts Festival, like Dance Brazil, like Festival Afro-Bahia, like the Caribbean Culture Center, African Diaspora Institute in New York City, and the Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts. And his research, as he said, focuses on Central African culture in Bahia, and he's initiated new discussions of the Bantu aesthetics and the philosophy in Bahia. He's taught graduate and undergraduate courses in Latin American and African American studies and humanities courses at Temple University. And our good fortune is he's connected with our friend and colleague in Bahia, Mestre Yoji Sena, who is working in close collaboration with me to bring into reality a project that we call Afro-Descendientes. Yoji, as Dr. Ken and I talk, what thoughts and reflections do you have on this conversation?
Well, it's like a mini lecture that I just was watching, but and it's interesting to see Dr. Dossar develop his ideas. I would like to ask him. Um, well, now I think he does play here in Bahia as a local after so many years, and you know he speaks Portuguese perfect, with accent and everything. But I would like to ask him what, at first, or in general, as an African American, what things does make you feel, you recognize as familiar, as about both cultures here, and what things you think it's so different how African American do, that you encounter here?
That's a good question. I think the most accessible cultural aspect is music. Even it doesn't have to be in English, but if it's, we're all used to, you go up in the Black community, wherever you are, you're all used to some kind of polyrhythmic bass, some bottom polyrhythmic, some melody and some harmony. And Brazil just brings it together in such a beautiful, beautiful way that I've seen grown men hear some music, some romantic music, and these are hard dudes, start crying. Or Mestri, and you know this, when they raise contra Mestri to Mestri, the energy when those Mestri start singing will bring people to tears. So those kinds of emotional contacts, I think, are the easiest to relate to. Of course, the food, beans and rice and some chicken and a good beverage, that's familiar. But also the notion of ashe, which I can't exactly make a good transition, but in the Christian church, I would think it's something like sanctifying grace, if not exactly. But it's the ability to make things happen. Mm-hmm. All right. So as Yoji was saying, as Mestri was saying, I'm walking down the street talking to somebody. He walks by. We never met. I'd seen his photo on Facebook. And I said, oh, there's Mestri Senior. I said, Sina. And he looked at me and he came over and we started talking. We must have talked 40 minutes. And then some lady came down the street. She recognized us both from someplace. I don't know who she was. And she told us we had to be at this art opening, right, Miss? She told us we had to be. Yes. And then she told us, well, we're going to do some work together.
She started crying too. It was intense encounter. At first, it was like.
And here's the work that we're doing together today.
Well, that's what you called the magic, I think. I mean, that validates what you started off with, Dr. Dossar, that there's a magic at hand, a magic that is alive, that's real.
Absolutely.
And even this conversation is a reflection. The feeling of this conversation is a reflection of the reality of that immersive and expansive cosmic presence that we are part of, and that we are within, and that is within us as well.
And I think it's incumbent that as we move, we're really looking at human evolution, mm-hmm. On a serious kind of level, particularly with artificial intelligence coming in. And from this side, we have white supremacy, patriarchy coming in. Mm. So what are we going to do? All right, are we going to be eliminated? With these movements, this woke movement and the banning of books, they can rewrite the history that we've struggled to bring forward in the last 2 generations, right? So this notion of developing one's ashe, ability to make things happen for the good, for the large community, right? We have to work on that, all right? How do we work without or with less ego. You know, so let me just step into a pile of trash here for a minute. If we go back to Chris, all this waste of time talking about Chris Rock and Will Smith, because we got our own problems to solve that are very serious. All right. In terms of respect, period, Chris Rock should have never spoken off key about anything. He's not there to make fun of somebody's wife. Will Smith was wrong for smacking him. But I'm saying, just as, you know, it's Mike Tyson who said, you know, folks think they can say anything to you because they're not afraid of getting punched in the face. All right. So this whole notion that we're wasting time with is Chris this and Will that. Listen, squash it, move forward. All right. Because white supremacy is not waiting. You know, Ron DeSantis got a plan for us.
What does moving forward mean, Dr. Ken and Yoji, for the African world? And that, to me, again, places us back in the conversation of an Africana way of knowing, the notion of Afro-descendientes, the notion of connecting us to Africa, African culture, to Kemet. How do we go back and also go forward, both directions at the same time? What do you think? I'm coming out of John Coltrane in saying that. That's the name of one of his songs, Both Directions at the Same Time.
He has an album dedicated to Bahia called Bahia,
Yeah.
from 1968.
You know, in a certain way, you know, don't laugh at me, but the story of Superman is where, you know, the planet's Krypton's getting ready to be destroyed, and Superman's parents put him in the and get him out, right? We got to get our kids out into international settings. Let them speak, you know, 3-4 languages. It can be done.
Yeah.
You know, everybody can't play basketball, football, right? So if you can't do that, learn a language, you know, and ask for help. Help is out there, you know, internationally. Mestre knows this.
Yes, I agree.
Yoji, what do you think? You know, Yoji connected me with the Brazil, with the Yoruba Brazilian Descendants Organization in Brazil. We were on an international
Lagos.
call with people from Nigeria, from Lagos, people from Bahia, and I was joining the program here. I thought it was wonderful just to be in that conversation, in that company. How do we, with intention and your model of using languages as one of the pathways, how do we ratchet up that sense of ownership and responsibility and accountability that will save our people? And I believe, Dr. Ken, saving our people means saving humanity, that it's one and the same. If we don't save ourselves, the entire negative forces you've described, the dark side of AI and the historical you know, work of white supremacist thought, we got a problem. We got a big problem. How do we ratchet up both our awareness and our action to defend ourselves and humanity? You got about a minute. What do you think? Your opposing thought.
Think go ahead. I think we are in a crucial time, right? As he says, the rise of white supremacism, but also for us, it's, I think, the first generation that we do have the power and the tools to be Pan-Africans, and also in a you know, in a roots level. We are able, like we are doing,
We got to close it. We're out of time. Listen, gentlemen, thank you so much, Dr. Dossar, Brother Yoji.
Yes.
Thank you both. I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation with Al McFarland. We'll see you next time. Support. Yeah.